what's the bigger picture of kosher? So before we could really touch on what that is, there's something fundamental as a foundation that just needs to be put out there, although I'm sure in different ways everybody's familiar on different levels and in different contexts. But the fundamental idea that Judaism in its entirety can be broken down into three main parts, or three main sections and categories. And what those are is the first category is the group, or the groupings that no one has any problem with. Not us, not them, not the observers, not the non-observers. They're so much a part of the fabric of our society that people today are even saying, let's just take down, the 10 Commandments off of the courthouse walls because it's just who we are. We don't need to be told not to steal and not to murder. We know that, which really is fantastic to think that Judaism has made such an impression thousands of years over time that it's just who a human and a moral person is without God. Now, obviously, it only came about through God and his laws, but it's just everybody, if we moved to an island and we came up with just a code of, civilized living without any divine intervention, we would say, be respectful, don't take what isn't yours, don't hurt another. You don't need a God to tell you that. And so no one argues with that whole set that falls in that category, the mishpatim, the things that they make sense to us. The second category, most people don't have problems with either, in the same way that I wouldn't have a problem if you were celebrating your birthday, even though it's not mine. And you wouldn't have an issue if someone was celebrating a big anniversary. It's commemorative, it's personal to you. So the fact that in Judaism there's so many events throughout the course of the year where we're celebrating something that took place in our collective history. So we're celebrating, we were taken out of Egypt, we received the Torah, and we have traditions and customs and laws that go along with these celebrations. They're personal. They happen to our family. So if you weren't taken out of Egypt, you might not be celebrating this, but you don't have any issue with the fact that I am. So no one really is bothered terribly by anything that falls into the category of Eidut, because they're commemorative in a way that kind of doesn't rub anyone the wrong way. They're personal or they're communal, and that's the second category. The third category is the most fun, because the third category, called chukim, are the things that we were not given a reason for, we were not given an explanation for, and then some of them are so bizarre and make so little sense that Jews and non-Jews and the world at large scratch their head wondering, what, God wants you to do that? One of the categories, or one of the subcategories in this third category, is kosher. Kosher is a set of very detailed laws that are not enumerated in rabbinical sources as their primary basis, but rather in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy, verse after verse, all the basics which you're going to cover in the other courses of, not mixing meat and milk, and what makes an animal kosher. It has to have hooves, and it has to chew its cud, split hooves. It has to be slaughtered in a very particular way. And actually, you're probably familiar, the Smicha program that was based here for many years, almost everything that they studied for the year here revolved around kosher and slaughter and all the minute details of what the knife and the preparation and the thought process that goes into it. All of these things are written as straight up verses in the Torah, of course with additional commentary afterwards to help us explain and help us put it into a practical format. But ultimately, all of these laws that are spelled out for us don't come with a because or this is why or a real level of understanding. In fact, at the conclusion of the kosher laws, there's one verse where God writes, I am holy, and therefore you shall be holy unto me. That's the concluding verse of all of this kosher talk, which kind of tells us, well, if I eat with this godly diet, it will make me holy. But why is a cow holier than a pig? And why is a cud or a fin or a scale or, this bird versus that bird really relevant? And what's the real reason? So the fact is that kosher is in this category, and it's usually the category that on one hand is very unsatisfying, because we want to understand and we want reasons and we want explanations for why we do things. God gave us the intellectual capacity to use, to understand. So before we get into some of the understanding of it, it's very important to note that just as in our relationship with a human being, the things that you're asked to do, and you get why you should do it. The light bulb's out, could you please change it? And you understand that you're changing the light bulb for the benefit of everyone to enjoy being able to see. So you get it. And you're in a wonderful, happy, healthy relationship if you do that. It makes sense, and you know why it needs to be done, so you do it. And then there's the next level where you know what the other person likes, and you like it too. So you're both going to go out together to Pita Pals because you both enjoy a good shawarma. So what a lovely relationship. You're doing something that you both enjoy and you both like. What could be better than that? But we all understand that a relationship that's better than just good is one in which the other will do what doesn't necessarily make sense or isn't logical or isn't something that they need for themselves, but just because I love you and just because I know this is what you want, even though I don't want it or I don't need it or I don't even get it, that's romance. That's love, and that's the relationship that most of us strive for. Although if you have just when I ask, the other person does, you're doing well. And if you have that you both like doing things together, and that's also excellent. But the highest level, and really the best level, is what I will and could do for you doesn't need to make sense to me. It doesn't need to be something that I enjoy or I like. I love you and I want to connect to you and I want a relationship with you, and that's a good enough reason for me to do something odd or bizarre or that I don't get. And that's really the romance of Judaism, is not to explain chukim, this category of we don't get it, but to say, because we want to connect to God and because God asks us to do it, I'm good to go. That's good enough. That's on one level. On another level, God also tells us, and it's also discussed at length in Kabbalistic, mystical, and fundamental sources, that in order for us to connect to the divine, we have an issue. Because if I divided the room in two and I said we are going to build team 1 and team 2, we're going to have a contest and we're going to be building a bridge, going to provide all the materials and all the labor necessary to build this bridge over an infinite body of water. You have as much time and materials as you need. So group A is very industrious, very hardworking, and you spend a year and you get 100,000 miles of bridge covered. Incredible achievement. You guys a little lackluster, a little lazy, not so interested, you only cover 100 miles. So who's closer to bridging this infinite body of water? The sad and unfair answer is nobody. You cannot. It's an impossible contest because there is no way to ever build a bridge to something that doesn't end. So that sounds a little bit depressing if you say, well, I want to connect to God. God created me. He's the source of all my blessings and gifts in this life. But anything that I'm going to do is never going to get there because He's infinite. I'm finite. All the things that I'm going to, run myself in circles trying to do are not connecting to God. But if God extends a bridge to us and says, this is what you can do to get closer to me, then we have a chance. Then we have a framework to get close to God and to appreciate what God has given us, because God's the one setting the standards. It's not just us running around in circles trying to get somewhere in our own, vision of what we think needs to take place. But it's God saying, these are the things that you need to do, or I would like you to do. And as our manufacturer, just like I don't question, why the F1 button is for help and the escape button is for, rebooting, because I'm pretty Amish when it comes to computers. I don't know much. So if that's what I'm supposed to do, that's what I'll do. I'm not going to start questioning it. Just like most of us, you go to the doctor, you're going to start questioning his years of study and research. He knows better. So we kind of give that, in certain instances in our life, we understand that and we don't need anyone to explain it. But when it comes to God, we need a lot more than just that. And so the idea of tameh ha-yahadut, or tameh ha-mitzvahs, understanding why something is commanded, is very important, because the word tameh means reason, but it really means a flavor or a taste, which is something that's associated with pleasure and appreciation. When I understand something and when I appreciate the benefits of something, I'm able to do it in a way where I'm more enthusiastic, I'm more excited, and I actually internalize this godliness that I'm supposed to. And so as much as kosher is in that category of a chok, It is not given an explanation or a reason. There are so many levels that we can appreciate, and so I want to touch on a few, but with the highlighted sentence that really that's not ultimately why we observe kosher. So this story is I actually called my father this morning to verify that I had it all correct. Both of my parents grew up in very Jewish identified homes, but extremely and profoundly secular homes. So they knew they were Jewish, both parents are Jewish, and their brand of Judaism that they practiced was leave us alone. They didn't observe to any synagogue, no temple, no high holidays, no bar mitzvah. We're Jews, but we're really Americans, so really we don't want to hear anything you have to say. And that was just how they were raised. They had the luxury of this because they came over more or less with Columbus. And, my great-grandfather fought in the Spanish-American War on the American side, so they had enough generations to assimilate to the degree where they were very comfortable. There wasn't even the guilt, because no one spoke Yiddish to them. There weren't matzo balls, there was apple pie. So my father this is the summer when he's 16 or 17 years old, he gets a summer job during high school working at this Italian meat plant or slaughterhouse in Newark, New Jersey. And his job, he was working with the government inspector. So the Italian owner of this plant had a kosher kill floor, simply for profits. He had a kosher shochet, ritual slaughterer, with like 20 assistants. And he would make more money on every animal that was kosher than not. So primarily, it was a kosher slaughterhouse, but then anything that wasn't kosher would be sold to other markets. And so my father says he shows up, the first day of his, I don't know why he chose this particular summer job. He could have been mowing lawns or, lifeguarding, which is what he did, other summers. But this, for whatever reason, interested him. And he sees that the shochet, he's describing how the shochet slaughters the animal. The animals then, the carcass is opened. All of the internal organs are divided into separate tables where there's an inspector, a religious, orthodox-looking person, at each table inspecting the different organs. So a table for lungs, a table, all the details. But every organ had its own table. And as each one was, they inhaled or they blew up the lung to check and see, every single table had a ticket. And if that organ was perfect with no lesions or bumps or tears or growths or anything wrong with it, it was given a stamp. And the slaughterer the shochet would go around, collect all of the tickets that all the organs were kosher, and he would carve in, my father didn't know at first what he was carving, 3 Hebrew letters, Kaf, Shin, Resh. And then if an animal had one organ, or 2 or 3, that had something wrong, that had a defect or a growth or something was rotted or sickly or whatever it was, the slaughter would mark 2 X's in the carcass of the animal. And my father's job was to go with this U.S. government inspector. They would make a cut in the rib of the animal and look for marbling. If there was a lot of marbling, that means it's good fatty meat. It would get a mark U.S. grade A prime. And if it didn't have good marbling and it wasn't, a symmetrical, thick, juicy piece of meat, it would say U.S. grade A choice. And my father's there. It's his first day on the job. What he knows about kosher is it's something from Fiddler on the Roof or old Jews back in some old shtetl somewhere ate, kishker, knishes, or gribnis, something you can't pronounce, and even if you could, you don't want to actually see what the item is. And, maybe a rabbi makes a blessing on it or something like that, but of course it's ridiculous. And he's in this, plant, and he sees after every animal's inspected, every organ and every part, if it's perfectly healthy, it gets the kosher symbol. And if there's something wrong with it, and it could be minor or major, it's U.S. grade A prime or choice. And he's thinking, my father said he brought his pork sandwich with him to work. He's thinking, do the people buying the more expensive U.S. grade A prime know what they're getting? Do they know that this animal could have been sick and cancerous? He was horrified to think the people who are eating kosher are getting the healthy animals, and all of us, what are we getting? And that was like the first time any kind of light bulb went off in his head. Like, maybe there's more to Judaism than just Fiddler on the Roof or like some voodoo rabbi making some kind of comment. Maybe there's something that actually is logical and makes sense, because what's up with this kosher thing? Now, it would be many years before my father and my mother would, they started in college with kosher style, which means they would pick the shrimp out of the salad and then eat the kosher salad. And, they made progress very, very slowly over the course of quite a number of years, until by the time they got married, they decided that they were going to be, fully committed to a kosher Chabad home. And the interesting PS to the story is my great-grandmother, who, again, she grew up as an American, Jewish kid, but no kosher. She was so horrified at the thought that, being the wonderful baker she was, she wouldn't be able to send from Florida baked goods to us, her grandkids, her great-grandkids, that at the age of 79, she had a bunch of Chabad rabbis come to her house in Florida with blow torches, kosher her whole kitchen, like hook, line, and sinker, the whole deal, get rid of the bone china from, whatever wedding gift it was, and every single month we would get a box from Florida from our great-grandmother, who wasn't an observant woman, and she didn't start keeping Shabbos, but she koshered her kitchen because she wanted her grandkids, her great-grandkids, to be able to enjoy the things that she made for us. And so kosher is something that in my family is more than just, a law that doesn't have a reason or an explanation, but in fact, one of the levels of which you hear often, that kosher is healthier, it may very well be true. And the fact that there's rigorous inspection process and all the things that I just described that my father witnessed, which caused him to first kind of take a deeper look at what Judaism really has to offer, they're there. Another thing that I would say is, as parents, it's kind of, I feel like I should get the bar already. You're always negotiating, because you say no, but then sometimes the no is yes. So you have to go to sleep now, but sometimes you could stay up later, and you have to do your homework right when you get home, but sometimes you can wait and have a snack. So you're always kind of being very consistent, but it's life, so you can't always be consistent. And it's fascinating that with certain things, when your kids know, there is no discussion. It's a straight up no. They don't even bother arguing, because they just know this is not an area of negotiation. Now, I didn't realize how much of an impact this really had until I was at Kroger in Toco Hills, which I'm sure some of you have shopped at, and I'm pushing my cart down the aisle, and I see a lovely African-American woman with her daughter, and as I'm passing by, I hear her say, "Shaniqua, put that down, it ain't kosher." And I stopped my car, because I was like, what did I just hear? It was just a bizarre scene. So I don't usually talk to strange people in grocery stores for no reason, but I was like, oh, you're Jewish? I didn't even know why I said it. I didn't think before I said it. And she's like, oh, no, but I always hear the Jewish moms telling their kids to put it down because it's not kosher, and it works, they put it down. And I was like, okay, but I don't think, there's no end to that story, except it works because the kids know it's not. I could throw a tantrum, I could turn on the waterworks, I could do whatever I normally do when my mother says no, but if we keep kosher, and my mother says no, it's not kosher, the most, difficult child in terms of challenging you when you tell them something and they want to see if you really mean it, they know it's real. And that's something that's so fundamental that it's actually interesting, because the first two human beings who God created, Adam and Eve, way back, in Eden, he didn't, they're in paradise and everything's wonderful. And God only says one thing: eat whatever you want. Just don't touch this tree. So in the very, DNA of humanity, there was this concept. Of course, the story goes in a totally different direction, which we're not going. But there's this concept of discipline. You could have something, some things are yes, and then some things are no, don't touch. Why and what it symbolizes and what it represents. But we all know that a disciplined person, someone who has discipline either naturally or more often something that they worked on, is usually someone that's marked for success. And there's so many experiments or studies that have been done. One famous one that was done at Stanford University, where a professor gave marshmallows to different children, and he said, if you don't touch the marshmallows, then in 10 minutes I'm going to give you another marshmallow. And if you eat the marshmallow, you don't get that second marshmallow. And they had cameras on the kids, and it showed that some kids waited till he left and took the marshmallow, and there was no delaying gratification. Here's a marshmallow, I'm eating it. And some kids are like, well, if I wait, I get two. 2 marshmallows is better than 1, so I'm going to wait. And you see the kid like picking it up, touching it, smelling it, putting it back down. You see. And the interesting thing was that they followed these children, the children who did manage to wait. Some managed 7 minutes, some got all the way to 10. It was a few that waited, and maybe it was 10 or 20, and then received the additional marshmallow. But they followed these children for 20 years or 25 years. And what they conclusively showed in this study was the children who had that discipline to not take because they were going to get more, they were the ones that were most successful in school because they had this mechanism or this ability to delay gratification, meaning I'm going to do what I need to do or what I want to do or I know I should do, and it doesn't matter what your talents or abilities or in what area you go, that fundamental gift, if you will, or something that many people work very hard to acquire, is something that really provides a success in life. So the fact that kosher on one level has that disciplinary concept built in where, yes, there's things to enjoy and things to appreciate in life, but there's things that you have to hold back and they're not yours to elevate, so to speak. It's an interesting thing that as a foundation in the Jewish DNA, this concept of self-discipline, of not always saying yes and not everything is available, was something that played a role. It's also, they say they tell the story of the teacher in communist Russia who had a class of students, and of course, communism was all about promoting their own brand of ism. No God was allowed or accepted, and so one of the lessons the teacher was trying to impart was a very simple one, and she pointed to her desk and she asked all the students, do you see my desk? And the kids say, sure. She says, that's because it exists. And the teacher says, do you see the window? And all the children say, yes. And she says, it's because it exists. And she points around the room at all the different objects and items. And every time she says, do you see it? They say yes. And she says, it's because it exists. And finally, she gets to the punchline of her lesson. And she says, does anyone here see God? And the students all look at each other. And they're like, no. And she bangs her hand on the table. It's because he doesn't exist. Lesson accomplished. So little Yankel in the back of the room raises his hand and he says, does anybody see the teacher's brain? Right? Because she doesn't have one. But we all know that the things in life that we see, they're real, right? Our 5 senses tell us if we could smell it and feel it and touch it and taste it, it's real. But what we all know without ever having to be told is the things that really matter, love and confidence and appreciation and bonds with people and family and a God. Those are things you cannot feel or touch with our physical senses, but they're things that we feel nonetheless in a more real way with the part of us that's spiritual, with the soul that we have. And kosher, while our digestive system processes food into nutrition for our body, kosher is the godly diet that allows our soul to process the godly and divine sparks and give nourishment and nutrients to the things in our life that we may not see and feel on a tangible level, but are nonetheless there and in more of a sense real in a way that everybody knows a happy person has the things that you can't necessarily feel and touch. It's not about, the cars or the homes or the clothes. It's about the love and the companionship and the nachas, or the feelings that I have a life with meaning and purpose. And so while kosher is a diet in terms of food and the physicality that we interact with and how we eat it, it nourishes much more than just that which is physical. It nourishes that which is spiritual. And along with that, it gives us other side benefits which people tend to mention, of health. And today you have, if you go into a store like Trader Joe's, they'll have a little pamphlet right when you walk in with all the kosher products and the vegan products and the organic products and the nut-free and the gluten-free. And everybody in our society has a heightened awareness of the importance of what we ingest. But as Jews, we have that awareness that it's not just the nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, but it's also the godly and the divine that helps us live a life that's more than just about the physical. So there's a story or an anecdote that's related in the Talmud, which is very fascinating. It's a discussion where it talks about a group of rabbis who all got together to discuss what are the most fundamental ideas in Judaism. And there were many, many suggestions offered and many ideas given, and it boiled down to 4 finalists. What were these ideas? So one finalist was the idea of monotheism. God, the Jewish people, have influenced the world in an incredible way by introducing the idea that there's one creator, one power, one force in the world. And this is something we can all relate to today. Thank you. Thank you. But really, back in the day when everybody believed in the sun, moon, the stars, and the sand on their feet, this was something totally revolutionary and incredible that Judaism introduced this idea. So all the rabbis, stroked their beards and agreed that, yes, this was a profound contribution to the world. The next rabbi came up and he said the idea that we're created in God's image and that every single human being has not just a physical, animalistic pursuit of pleasure in this world, but also a higher purpose and calling. This idea is so fundamental. This is the biggest contribution that Judaism has given to the world. The third rabbi said, no. The idea of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha, loving a fellow human being as you love yourself, kindness and helping others and being there for someone else, that's the most profound idea. So you have these big ideas, monotheism, loving humankind, and believing that humanity is created with a touch of the divine. These are all huge ideas. The fourth finalist proposed an obscure verse in Leviticus that talks about giving one sacrifice in the morning and one sacrifice in the evening. And he quoted this verse as being Judaism's greatest contribution. And the Talmud concludes something unheard of. All the rabbis agreed. That never happens. Never happens. It happens maybe 3 times. All the rabbis agreed that this rabbi had the right idea, and it ends there. And you're kind of left scratching your head thinking, monotheism, that's a big one, I get it. Humankind, humanity being in God's image, I get it. Loving one another and being, open to sharing your life and helping a hand with somebody in need, I get that. But a sacrifice in the morning and a sacrifice in the evening, this is what all the rabbis agreed was the greatest contribution. So I don't know if any of you here have been to the city of Prague. Anybody here? In the center of the city, not in the Jewish quarter, not in the Jewish ghetto, but in the center of the city of Prague, there's a huge statue depicting the image of the Maharal of Prague, a 15th century Kabbalist mystic attributed with creating the golem. Very fascinating figure. But the Maharal gives an explanation on this piece in the Talmud. And he says, what did all the rabbis, how did they all agree? We don't know. But that this verse, an offering, a sacrifice in the evening and a sacrifice, in the morning, and this is the most profound contribution in Judaism. So he explains something very interesting. Every human being, doesn't matter what your background, what your nature, what your nurture, where you came from, we all have moments when we're inspired by something, a cause, a person, an idea, a philosophy, a movement. And usually when you're inspired, and it comes from within, you roll up your sleeves and you do something about it. So you make a commitment, you make a resolution, you help in the soup kitchen, you go for a friendship circle run, you do something because you're moved by whatever this thing or idea is. And that's how human beings are. But we all know that inspiration is wonderful because it motivates us to get up and do something. But it also fades almost as quickly as it comes. And when you make a resolution or when you join a cause, usually there's a fizzling out period that takes place. And after, whether it's a week or a month, everybody's different, you usually lose that inspiration. You go back to things as usual until the next thing comes along. So some people, Yom Kippur is so inspiring, and they're committed to be better Jews and more focused and more, determined to do whatever it is that they feel that level in their life is necessary or what's required of them. And some people it's, a friend or a family member that it motivates them or inspires them. But there's something that Judaism teaches us that's unique in the sense that we're not just told when you're moved and when you're inspired and when you feel like it, get out there and do the right thing. Of course do that, but you would do it without anyone telling you. Rather, this verse is alluding to this idea that every morning and every evening you get out there and you do the right thing. You make a sacrifice. You do what needs to be done. You help that person in need. You listen to the person who's asking you for, advice or for help. You do the thing that needs to be done, whether you're in the mood, whether you feel inspired, whether you feel motivated, whether you're worked up and excited, enthusiastic about it or not. And that's the greatest contribution to Judaism. It requires of us to be better people despite our mood or despite how inspired we feel. And that's something that's so fundamental to making our world a better place, because if we lived in a world where everybody just did whatever their mood dictated, how many people would be lying in bed, not going to work, not getting their kids to school, not because I'm not in the mood, I don't feel like it. So living your life by what needs to be done, by action, by deed, as opposed to by mood and inspiration, is a concept in Judaism that's so fundamental, because what it says is, yes, there's going to be moments that you're inspired and you're enthusiastic, and that's beautiful. It's a gift. Take it and ride it for all it's worth. But those days, and there'll be quite a few, where there's nothing shining and sparkling and calling your attention, on those mornings and on those days to wake up and say, if this is the right thing, if this is what's good, if this is what needs to be done, I'm going to do it whether I'm moved to do it or not. And it ties into this idea of kosher, because making the leap or making the change to incorporate kosher in a person's lifestyle, sometimes we do feel and do see the health benefits, and we do understand a point which I didn't mention, although it's very important, that this concept of kosher, imagine this, you're a kosher observer for whatever reason, because your mother was, or because it's healthier, or whatever fill in the blank reason, and you're traveling on a business trip to Tokyo. So you land, you arrive, what's the first thing you're going to do? You need to make contact with Jews or Jewish community or the Chabad or somewhere in Tokyo to find out where you're going to get your kosher meal from, or your kosher restaurant or kosher groceries. So what does that allow a Jew in today's day and age to do? Because going back a few generations, no one was flying to Tokyo, so we didn't have this scenario. What did this cause? The identity and the bond that you had with fellow Jews anywhere in the world is something that's so strong and so real, because you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, you don't know anyone, but if you keep kosher, automatically you're linked up with everybody else who keeps kosher, who P.S. are your family. And so it actually, in a practical level, although again it's not the reason, but imagine what our society, we struggle with the concept of assimilation and intermarriage, because we're all one big happy family. Everybody's so kind and loving. You could do what anyone else could do. Just because you're a Jew doesn't mean you can't be a CEO of a company, go to the best colleges. And that's wonderful on one level, but if you're going to lose touch with who you are and what your foundation is and what your soul is really made up of, then there's a great danger and risk there. However, just by the food you eat, not by what you think and what you believe and what you practice, just something as simple and basic as food, anywhere in the world that you go, you're right away linked in and connected and bonded with fellow tribe members, family members. And that's something that's very powerful, although it's just a PS. But ultimately, getting back to the basic of kosher, God determined that this is his diet. So it's not the Atkins or the South Beach or the, any other diet that has its benefits for whatever the time or the interest that you're pursuing a specific diet. But the godly diet is one that nourishes not just our bodies in the way that God sees fit, but our connection to our fellow, our connection to our community, our physical existence in the world as disciplined human beings who are able to make choices sometimes, yes, this is good for me, no, this isn't, based on a higher authority. And ultimately, getting up every day and saying, I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do for me. It's like the blood type diet, where for my blood type, this is the best set of foods. even if today I don't feel that inspiration, or I'm not moved by the fact that I'm in the airport and I'm really hungry and the only thing available is a potato chips or a banana, and I'm not feeling motivated and inspired by this kosher thing right at this moment, doing the right thing is an inspiration in itself, but on a different level. And so I want to kind of conclude with something practical that I know everybody in this room probably comes from a very different background, level of observance, or, and everything in between. But this is something that whatever your current level or interest in kosher is, everybody can incorporate without infringing on your comfort and space. In an address given to women and girls by the Lubavitch Rebbe, going back, this is like the late 70s, early 80s. He addressed all of the women who came down to the main synagogue in 770. And one of the fundamental ideas that he highlighted to the women was that as women, and sometimes this can be applied to men as well, we spend so much time preparing food for our families, more than we even want. Every other hour, you're making a meal, you're preparing a snack, you're working on dinner, you're shopping for it, you're bringing the stuff home, unpacking it, preparing it, putting it, no need to go there. Everybody knows, the food that goes on in our lives. And yes, it's nourishment, and yes, it's something that we do, but 2 points that the Rebbe mentioned that I think one is just inspirational, but one is practical, that the priests in the Holy Temple, the activities that they did that gave them the status in the Jewish community of this, standing as the ones doing the divine service, ultimately what they did was very similar to what any Jewish housewife would do, preparing the different goings-on to run a home and to run a kitchen. And those things were considered godly in the temple, but they're considered godly and holy in our homes, even though they're so mundane. And they're so repetitive. And even if you're a gourmet cook, or even if you're blessed to be someone like me who prepares dinner for 150 people every Friday night, because all of our students come, so I see a lot of food, the perspective of I'm a high priest in my temple when I'm interacting with the food, as opposed to, again, I'm peeling 25 pounds of potatoes, gives you a different appreciation for what you're accomplishing kind of on a larger scope. But in a small practical way, what the Rebbe mentioned to all the women in the room was every Jewish home, usually whether you wanted this or you received it in the mail, has a charity box, a tzedakah box. Sometimes it's from the JNF. It's a little metal one that your grandmother had from 100 years ago. Sometimes you got it from your local Chabad or your local school or day school. And the concept, of course, is that you're supposed to put your change there. And this helps us to become people who are giving and people who value this trait of sharing what we have with others, even if it's just a coin. What the Rebbe said is to take that charity box from wherever it rests, on top of the refrigerator or in the cabinet, and affix it to the wall of your kitchen with a nail, with a screw, with a little shelf, whatever it is, so that it's not just an object in your home that occasionally you remember to use, but that it's in the very foundation of the wall of your kitchen, because most of us know the kitchen is the hub or the center of everything that goes on. All the best conversations and all the worst conversations and all the real conversations take place in the kitchen. It's the center of the family in terms of everybody always has to come there. You don't always have to go to that rec room in the basement. You could not go there for 2 months and it's okay, but you always need to be in the kitchen at some point during the day, and everybody seems to pass each other there either for extended periods or short periods. And what the Rebbe said is, take a charity box and put it in your kitchen in a location where you could see it and where it's actually part of the kitchen, not just in the back of a cabinet. And what does this do? The feng shui of it, or the energy of it, that it emits in the kitchen, that this is a home where we give, where we share, and where everything we do here is elevated because of that little box in the corner. Every meal that's being prepared here, every snack that's being grabbed on the go here, is endowed with some sense of holiness and some sense of godliness, because it's in a home and it's in an environment where we understand that it's not just about getting those calories and having that energy to do the next thing, which of course we all know is the purpose, we eat so that we have energy to do the wonderful things that we do. And in a sense, that's how we elevate the food, by using the energy that we get to do all the wonderful things that we do. But the Rebbe said this idea of affixing a tzedakah box is something that will transform the mundane goings-on in a Jewish kitchen from being just a place where we're eating, or we're mindfully eating, or we're spiritually eating, or we're nourishing our souls, or we're using the energy that we know we're getting from this food that God specifically prescribed for us, but we're bringing it to a whole new level, because not only is our food being prepared in a uniquely Jewish way, which connects us to all the generations that passed before us who ate in this exact way as well, but it adds a new dimension that we not only keep this to ourselves, but we are able to expand this concept of giving and sharing with those around us in our community and in our families.
If you like that video, hit the subscribe button and notification bell below for hours of the best Jewish content online.